Welcome to our session today on emerging tech and design thinking for all. We're really excited to have you all here to discuss a little bit more about Verizon and ASU's partnership in Verizon Innovative Learning Labs and some of the work that we've done to bring this to scale. Just for introductions first, I'm Alex Servello. I'm Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for Verizon, leading all of our education and community work. And I'm really excited to be joined here today by Jimmy Choi.
Hi, Alex. Thanks. I'm Jimmy Choi. I'm a Vice President at Arizona State University's Knowledge Enterprise. I'm also the Executive Director of our J. Orrin Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute. Let's just do a quick check. Nobody's here for the Wellness and Run DMC session, right? Because you'd be a little disappointed, sorry. Before we get started, can we just, because we want to make sure that we contextualize our presentation today that suits you and that you have the takeaways that you'd like. Just by show of hands, can you show anybody in the room student? Great. And any K-6 educators? Okay. Middle school educators? High school educators? Okay. And higher ed? Great, some nonprofit? And other? Yeah. Corporate consultancies, Edtech startups maybe? Great, thank you. Okay, well, so the good news is you all are in the right room because what we're going to be talking about specifically is partnership and how you all interplay with each other and with institutions like us, so thank you.
Yes, absolutely, and I think the partnership is really key at looking at a lot of this work and how we've brought it to scale. Our objectives for today, just to level set, we're going to learn a little bit more about Verizon Innovative Learning and our partnership with the Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute at Arizona State University. We're also going to talk about the benefits of engaging students in design thinking and some of the real-world examples that we've seen happen in our labs that have been really critical to demonstrating how educators and students are able to integrate that technology effectively. And then we're going to explore Verizon Innovative Learning HQ, which is our new open access education platform that actually leverages the resources that we've built with Arizona State University in the Verizon Innovative Learning Labs. Before we get into that, I want to just first introduce you all to Verizon's responsible business framework, which is called Citizen Verizon. We released this back in 2020, and it really makes it so that we have a focus within the company on three key areas: digital inclusion, climate protection, and human prosperity. My incredible education team is really focused on digital inclusion in schools. And what that means is we're working at addressing those barriers to connectivity and making sure that we enable it for those who need it most. But one of the things that's really critical to the way that we work with schools is understanding that digital inclusion does not end when a student has a connected device. It is the beginning, but there is a significant amount of support that needs to happen across the way. So that's why, for us, we really strive to promote sustainable digital inclusion in the schools that we work with. So we go beyond that connectivity and device gap. Yes, we provide connectivity. Yes, we provide devices. But we also provide digital skills training. And that's for both the students as well as the educators on how to actually integrate that technology effectively in their classroom. And the other piece that we do is we enable emerging technology in those classrooms so that these teachers and educators, or teachers and students, are actually the first to actually use this technology. And we're using education as a place where innovation can happen rather than just waiting for innovation to happen in other industries. What's also really important to note is that while students are the population that we strive to serve most, we also understand that just serving students does not address systemic changes that need to happen in order for technology integration to actually occur. So we work with educators to bring the professional development. We have on-site support for them. We work with school administrators to talk about what does a culture of technology integration look like. And we work with district leadership to also look at that culture, but also realistically just the nuts and bolts of, hey, you got 1,000 iPads and students are going to take them home. How do you have a device management system that takes that into account? How do you actually securely connect those? And all of those pieces are really critical to the way that we look at education. And our education portfolio falls under the umbrella of Verizon Innovative Learning. Verizon Innovative Learning, we've expanded to 511 schools in 2021. We have a commitment to bring 100 schools 5G access. And we have, at this point, reached over 1 million students since 2012. A few of the programs that I want to call out are schools program that we have in partnership with Digital Promise. When we began that program in 2014, we were in 8 middle schools, and we are now in 511 schools. What's really critical to me when we look at the scaling of this program is not just that we've brought it to 511 schools, but we look at the fact that we have 90 districts in over 30 states, and 34 of those districts actually have Verizon Innovative Learning in 100% of their middle schools. So this school-based program has now become a district-wide initiative. We're going to talk about the lab program, and we also have the STEM Achievers program that occurs on over 40 college campuses across the country. All of these programs together make up our entire Verizon Innovative Learning portfolio. And our big goal within digital inclusion, within Citizen Verizon, is to reach 10 million youth with digital skills training by 2030. So that was just a lot of information to help you level set as to why Verizon is here, why we are committed to this work in digital inclusion, and why we really decided to partner with Arizona State University.
Yeah, Alex, one of the key things I think you might be hearing is about the scope and scale and reach, right? So this question becomes, how do you create enough programming, enough access, enough resources for many students to be engaged? And especially if you think about things like at the district level. The 100% participation at the district level is for that systems level innovation to be able to permeate an entire school district. It's helpful, of course, for the students in a single school. It's helpful for the educators in a single school. But when you have that interoperability, when you have language that's shared, when you have best practices that's shared, we're finding that that's one of the keys to scaling excellence as a whole. So Arizona State University, for those that may not know about us, we're the largest single administration public research university in the country. So what I mean by largest is largest by enrollment, and single administration means, as an example, it's Arizona State University as distinct from the University of California system with 10 different campuses and flagship institutions. We have 152,000 degree-seeking students. 152,000 degree-seeking students, of which around 90,000 of those students are on one of our 4 metropolitan campuses. And this is a key thing we talk a little bit about in terms of how you provide both an experiential, place-based, deep and rich experience for students that are on campus, and then how you might provide that similar experience, different but similar experience for students that might be online, and then how you bridge the gap between those as well. So there's a real distinct question around placemaking when it comes to what does it mean to be inside of a lab, what does it mean to be on one of our 4 metropolitan campuses, but at the same time, for a good 55,000 students that are seeking their degrees fully online, oftentimes juggling their jobs, juggling their family responsibilities, juggling a whole myriad of things that come with online degree seeking. The question is, how do we offer an experience that's just as good as, if not better, for being online than being on campus? And it's one of the key things we know too in terms of who are our learners. The great news about digitally supported, digitally mediated is that you have a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of understanding of everything from patterns of behavior, when people are logging in. Is there a reason why in this particular course, students are reaching a certain point and then dropping out? Is there something that's happening systemically in that course that we need to be thinking about? So Arizona State University is also the largest when it comes to, we're now I think number 6 National Science Foundation Higher Education Research Development rankings. That's important because what we're offering is a Research 1 experience for the 120,000 undergraduate students and the 30,000 graduate students. So it's not, and in higher education, it's always the tricky question, right? Are you a teaching institution? Are you a research institution? How do you be both? In our case, we're saying not only can you be both, but you can be a great community partner as well. So we're driven by our charter, which by design specifically says we're measuring ourselves by who we include and how we're all succeeding. So the idea of being large is not just for the sake of being large, it's about reach. So excellence with inclusion and impact at scale is the way that I might epitomize our perspective. And then when we look at partners like Verizon, we're driven and guided by our design aspirations. One of our design aspirations is to value entrepreneurship. The other is to conduct use-inspired research. So we're really guided by a set of values-driven principles. And Verizon became a partner that we thought not only could we have interoperability of our programming, but really drive together our values for excellence and for access and to provide more resources. So I'll pause there with that.
No, and I think that what's also important when we look at partnerships that Verizon takes on from corporate social responsibility is that your team offers a significant amount of subject matter expertise, but also a lot of thought partnership. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that's critical for Verizon as we look at digital inclusion efforts in education is that the programs that we started in 2012 are not the same programs that are needed in 2022. Right. And we really appreciate ASU's ability to help us think about not only what's needed right now, but what do we think is really going to be needed in the future. And you also bring the higher education perspective of thinking about what are the needs of college-going students that we're able to provide within our laboratories. So really excited to see that.
And one note for the higher education partners that are in the room, one of the things I think one of the key takeaways for you is how could you partner with your local schools? There's a whole spectrum of partnership here, and if there's one takeaway we want you to have is how to partner for greater impact. And that might mean everything from working with your public schools. It might mean how do you partner with your public library? How do you offer spaces and places and take advantage of what you might have, which is subject matter expertise, or you might have developed curricula, or you might have developed training already. How do you start to leverage that, not just for the benefit of your enrolled students and then the faculty and staff on your campuses, but how could you offer that in an open source access way so that other community-based organizations and partners can benefit?
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about this partnership with Arizona State University. We set out to create a space where students could truly be social innovators. And we wanted to take all of our learnings from programs like Verizon Innovative Learning Schools and ensure that we were providing a program where we weren't just, again, impacting students, but really looking at systemically what we could do within schools. And the first thing that we did within schools was we wanted to ensure that this design thinking curriculum that we were promoting had the correct space for that to actually happen. So we developed Verizon Innovative Learning Labs. And what we did was we went into schools, we took spaces that they had, and we developed custom-built emerging technology-enabled spaces. So this is an example at a school in Los Angeles. We are currently in 82 schools across the country where we have built these spaces. And Jimmy, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the curriculum that we have within those Verizon Innovative Learning Labs.
Yeah, so just one quick note. How many of you are familiar with design thinking, using design thinking on a regular basis? Yeah, quite a number of hands. Any opponents of design thinking? There's a session happening concurrently to this one. Alex and I were saying like, oh, I wish I was in that session, except I'm in this session. But that session, it's an interesting take on it, and it's this question of how design thinking has been captured in a way that continues to promote systemic social injustice. And I think when I'm not in that session obviously, but if I were to guess, one of the things I think is the idea of leading with products and services, and the idea that design thinking has been very much about like how to optimize for products and services, which continues to serve the mainstream. And in this presenter's words, the words that they used was to continue to support white supremacy. So I want to be clear, nobody is saying that design thinking is a panacea for anything. It depends on how it's being used, like anything else. The reason why we leaned into design thinking is, one, as an organization, how do you go from being a state university with 40,000 students enrolled and about a $620 million annual operating budget, which 64% used to come from the state of Arizona, to now where we are, 152,000 students, as I mentioned. We're at about a $4.3 billion operating budget per year. And now the number has significantly dropped from being about 64% state funded to being about 12% state funded. One of the ways that you do that is think on an enterprise level and an enterprise scale as a whole. And so when you're thinking about enterprise scale and enterprise level, can you bring an institution of 5,000 faculty, 20,000 staff members together along with you for that journey? Used in the right way, yes, you can, through design thinking, right? By continuing to go through what's the problem that we're actually trying to solve before you're starting with what's the product we're trying to create. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the systemic and underlying issues? Every time you ask and answer a question, but why is it that way? But why is it that way? But why does it have to be that way? But why does it have to be that way? The hope is with design thinking, you're able to unpack and uncover multiple levels of contributing factors, ecological factors, environmental factors as a whole, ecological similarities between institutions like yours and others, and using that process then start getting into, okay, but then who's impacted? Who's the end user? Who's the beneficiary? Who's the saboteur? Who's the person that's going to drive this forward? Who's the person that's going to stop this? Ultimately, who's the purchaser? So really putting, again, people into the middle of that before you start with products and solutions as the kind of endpoint. So for us, again, design thinking has been a way to promulgate a way of thinking that goes beyond the classroom experience. Same way that we think about entrepreneurial mindset, and there was a little blip we had about one of the things we do with the Edtech Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute is trying to make entrepreneurship accessible to everyone. Not just venture capital backed, not just scalable startups, but really the idea that entrepreneurial mindset, which is a complement and cousin to design thinking as a whole, can be a skill set that you carry with you from the classroom to how do you navigate, your job, you're picking up your kids, fitting in this, taking care of your parents. you can really design a solution for anything is one of the key things that we like to think about, or diagnose the problems well enough to understand how to diagnose the right solutions. So the curriculum that ASU has developed, and we have our team here, they're former in-service teachers, instructional designers, curriculum developers. We really have that expertise and perspective of being in the classroom, being in the spaces, and working with educators and working with students. So the curricula was designed to have 4 different courses, and out of those 4 different courses, I think it's like 146 different lessons, and in 4 key areas, specifically at the moment, looking at emerging tech. So as an example, we might have a lot in VR and AR. That's emerging tech. One of the things that we promote throughout the entire curricula is actually learning how to learn. So project-based learning, service-based learning, community engagement, and sustainable development at the core of it as well, because let's face it, climate change is going to be one of the biggest challenges that continue to face us moving forward. So the curriculum itself is divided into 4 major areas, but underpinning all of that is learning how to learn, learning how to take project-based learning, active-based learning, engaging students into designing, first of all, understanding the problems that they're trying to solve, and then designing those products and solutions. So we can go into a little bit of the detail, but those are the 4 areas: immersive media, digital product innovation, smart solutions. And the last one is augmented reality? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
No, and I think that what's also important when we talk about design thinking, one of the important aspects of the lab is that while we are promoting design thinking and promoting this curriculum, there is also a hope that this design thinking mindset will carry out into the other subject areas and carry out to other teachers. And we don't want the lab to become this insular area where it's just, this is your design thinking space and you never engage in this anywhere else. And one of the things that I wanted to point out also is, in addition to the design thinking curriculum in our labs, Verizon has also provided opportunities in augmented and virtual reality. What we actually did was back in 2019, we had a 5G Edtech challenge where we challenged developers to really create new solutions that could be used in these lab spaces. And what was really exciting about this actually put the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab teachers and students in the middle of the development process. So they were able to actually be talking to developers about the solutions that they were creating. When back in very early 2020, because I was traveling to Los Angeles, I went to a middle school in LA with the developers of Aurelia, which is the app you see in the top left. And we spoke to middle school science teachers about, do you really think you'll actually use this in the classroom? How often do you want to use it? What changes should we make so that this is actually applicable in a middle school science classroom? And the teachers were really able to get involved in that development process. Just to give you a quick highlight, Aurelia that you see in the top left is an augmented reality experience where students hold up their device, they watch the classroom fill up with water, and the teacher has the opportunity to actually change the environmental conditions. As they change the environmental conditions, students have to create organisms that will survive in that environment. And if they do not survive, they have to go back and they have to continue creating a new organism. Visceral science, they get to experience the life cycle of stars, explore the solar system. That is a fully virtual reality experience. But these were ways that we wanted to have teachers begin to have a way to get into the lab. So if I am a biology teacher and I want to use the lab, but I don't really know this design thinking process just yet, maybe this augmented reality experience will be the one ticket that I have in there. And now that you're in the lab, let's explore some other ways that we can bring in some of the curriculum that we've actually developed.
And we have a lot of examples of real use cases like that, where it's both simulation, but it's also putting yourself in that immersive environment for a particular reason. And the final point on that one, and anybody that's in technology knows this, as quickly as you learn a particular way to learn a particular coding language or whatever, it's going to change. So what we're looking for are those underlying skills that will not change while the technology continues to change. And that means, again, just diagnosing the actual problem, thinking about the solutions, testing them, prototyping them, talking to users about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then what I do want to point out too is that we, with Verizon Innovative Learning, it's really important to us that we're measuring the outcomes of this program. So with our third-party research, we have found that students that have gone through the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab program have been overwhelmingly more interested in science, engineering, technology. What's really interesting to me, and I can't see it because of this perfectly placed column, the more confident with virtual reality. The fact that we're demystifying emerging technology and making it something that students feel more confident with is really heartening to me.
Yeah, and educators know this, right? What's the thing that's going to capture the student? What's the thing that's going to capture the student that actually sees them, whether it's in a particular discipline or in a particular role or a different field? So much of what we know about students and college going is about, there was a session yesterday where we talked a little bit about this, that one incident, the one teacher, the one educator, the one person who inspired you, the one scenario. And so what we're looking to do is actually take away the chance of it and have it be less about, well, maybe you'll run into this, maybe you'll have an opportunity to see something, and that captures your imagination, versus actually curating towards exponentially increasing those outcomes and possibilities. Right. And that's the number one thing, is taking away that element of maybe you'll be lucky enough to have some reason to experience something, versus we're trying to create scale to allow for this to be as accessible for as many people as possible. We'll talk a little bit about opening up access too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's actually look at some specific examples of what's happening in these labs rather than in totality. So the first example I have is from Irving, Texas. The student here is Jaden. Jaden is an 8th grader in Irving, and Jaden needs an assistive device to use his iPad. The students in the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab actually created a keyboard that had target areas for Jaden to use to be able to use the iPad and engage with the technology. What this led to in Irving is a district-wide approach to looking at accessibility. So now the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab is being used as a center where they're actually developing wearables for students, they're developing this assistive technology, and they're also creating Switch adaptive toys to be used in early childhood classrooms. I was actually just at Irving on Monday, and I got a chance to look at one of the toys that they were developing. So an elephant that you have to press its foot to get music to play. Obviously, pressing the foot from a manual dexterity perspective can be difficult for some. So they developed a pad instead that you can more easily switch on and off. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Jimmy, was when I was speaking to the lab mentor there as well as the district administrator, we were talking about this idea of empathy. And we've spoken a lot about how empathy is often viewed as like the first part of the design thinking process and can almost be like a check mark, like, yep, I empathized. But it's really just inherent in everything that they do with this project and in the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab in general.
Yeah, and I think so. Empathy is important, but there's a real, again, this might be the kind of pitfalls of design thinking as well. Being really careful not to tokenize, essentialize any of the experience, try to, and the goal and quest to empathize with people, coming to the wrong conclusions, as it were, right? Shorthanding and shortcutting the idea of, oh, this is what it must be like to be X or Y or Z, as opposed to actually listening and talking and knowing that you might have that experience for Jaden, and this is something that works really well for Jaden, and Jaden's classmates wanted to do this together, may not be the same needs that other people have. Mm-hmm. So here's the conundrum about scaling. How do you both customize and scale at the same time? On the one hand, there's going to be your lived experience, my lived experience, yours is going to be so unique to each one of us. So we're looking for what are those common threads of universality without essentializing. And that essentializing part is the reason why you have to do many different opportunities and many different options and outcomes for students to engage in, for educators to engage in as well. And so it's a level of sophistication we're trying to promote with multiple opportunities, even when we talk about, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. So another example we wanted to share is, we had students that are working at a school in Compton, and they had a chance to imagine and start working for weeks. And there's a specific reason why we did this, the idea of working on an exoplanet. Something that doesn't exist yet, understanding what's that ecosystem, understanding what it's going to take for organisms, for things that live and survive on that exoplanet. The reason that the exoplanet is useful is because it's not sometimes just about you and me, and Alex, this is what I know about you, and this is what I know about this person. So reaching beyond into an experience that can be designed, curated, imagined within those parameters that we choose to accept. So the students created those parameters for that exoplanet. The students created the parameters for what are the conditions. They then implemented the technology and then came up with, and I think that's one of this next video, what would it take through technology assistance for certain things to happen on that particular planet. The empathy part comes from then being able to say, well, how do I extrapolate what I learned about that, and how is that relevant now to my immediate situation, my local community? So it's both this micro and macro at the same time, and it's that pulse of being able to go from that micro to the macro back to the micro, that I think is the useful thing that students are learning, in addition to the things we know about active project learning, right? The teamwork that happens, the development of understanding different skills, you know, who's strong in this, who's got great talents in that, who's able to take the lead on these particular things, who loves standing up and being the one that does that kind of showcase and presentation and wants to be the one that talks about it, versus the students that want to hang back a little and talk about these other things. So there's a whole reason why I think the curriculum supports a macro view of learning and development and engagement.
Absolutely, and I also love with this project the focus on tactile learning and the fact that when we talk about technology integration, it's not just, when I go into a classroom, I don't hope to go into a classroom and see a sea of students with a laptop in front of them. Right. The technology is, after all, a tool for quality instruction. It's not the quality instruction, right? So in this case, we have, for instance, in the top right, that's a student using a merge cube and exploring the exoplanet. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about some of this technology, you should check out our workshop later today that's going to explore it a little bit further. But I really appreciate the mix of the tactile with the technology.
Sure, that's right. And that's another way to, and that's why, you know, makerspaces, those of us that know about makerspaces, that engagement specifically with a physical part of, it's part of the learning process. And so, especially for students that might be more kinesthetic learners, right? They need that hands-on active ability to interact with something physical at the same time that you've got people that are great at and fine at being the abstract components to it. Right. So if there's a little bit of something for everyone and an opportunity to exercise either something that you're not familiar with or exercise something that you're very familiar with.
Absolutely. And aside from the design thinking curriculum, like I mentioned, our augmented and virtual reality applications, a story from Slam Miami, we have a student who's an aspiring rapper. And he actually used the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab and an application that we have called Mapper's Delight, which actually allows you to track the origin of lyrics and use it as a creative influence for him as he designed his own music. And of course, I don't have my notebook with me, but he had a great quote that I wanted to share with everyone, where he essentially said, he has a hard time expressing himself, but when he expresses himself through music, he feels like he can talk about things that he normally wouldn't talk about. And what I really appreciate about this also is going back to what we talked about with the VIL labs, not just being a place for the design thinking curriculum. I think this really promotes the lab as almost a creative commons. Sure. And a place where students can now explore all of these different opportunities. As you'll see in the video, all of the students are using different applications and really able to express themselves and explore their own passions in their own way.
Yeah. And that's the idea of student-led expression, right? A space where students lead. What's meaningful to them, ways that they want to express themselves, how their creativity is going to come out. And again, knowing that there's a full range and spectrum of people and what's going to speak to them each is an important thing for them. Now, the caution, and I know we're very aware of this, it's one thing to have that physical environment. It's another thing to have that emotional, social, psychological space to be able to do that as well. And so one of the things we're grappling with is, it's amazing if you're one of those schools that got those 80 labs or those 40 that are coming online next year. What if you don't have that kind of space? What if your physical environment is one in which that not only does it not allow you to dream and be creative and have student-led creative expression, but is actually depressing in many ways, right? Hard to get certain basics running, hard to get even just your daily going back and forth, going into school, getting your school lunches, getting your. So there's a complement that we're offering, and we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of the learning online overall, and how we're trying to create that space, which might be digitally mediated, but provide some of the similar constructs and provide some of the similar guardrails to say you can actually be in this space and you can be thinking about using technology for better outcomes, for future directions, without necessarily having to be in a lab like this. Now, again, it's something we're super aware of in terms of great if you're a school that's got that, what happens if you don't?
Right, but what the lab has provided us as partners is really a test bed for innovation. Yeah. It's been a place where we've been able to test the technology, test the augmented and virtual reality, and really empower educators to be some of those beta testers of that prep. So I think that the physical space has been important in that work, and really making these educators our early adopters of the technology. Sure. Now, like Jimmy had mentioned, not every school has a Verizon Innovative Learning Lab. But what we set out to do, and one of the important things in our partnership with Arizona State University, is that we wanted to ensure that the resources that we create are really available to everyone. If you remember what I mentioned, from a Verizon perspective, digital inclusion means ensuring that there's connectivity and access to those who need it most. And for us, that includes the applications of technology. So Verizon Innovative Learning HQ is our open access education portal that we launched back in 2021. I said back in 2021 as if it was 10 years ago, but it was last year. And that offers a few things. All of the augmented and virtual reality experiences that you can see in a Verizon Innovative Learning Lab can be accessed through Verizon Innovative Learning HQ. And those experiences can be accessed from a mobile device, a VR headset. We've really tried to democratize how you can access those experiences. We also offer standards-aligned and customizable lesson plans, including the entire design thinking course that Jimmy had mentioned earlier. So that's 146 lessons just from Arizona State University. And we also offer asynchronous professional learning opportunities that are aligned with micro-credentials that have been produced by partners like Digital Promise, as well as Arizona State University. Now, what I think, just some logistics about this program is entirely single sign-on with Microsoft, Google, Clever. So if you're an educator, you can access it that way. And all of the student-facing materials on the site can be shared immediately to Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, or downloaded as a PDF. This is a living, breathing site. It is a site where we are continuing to bring new education partners, and we already have a significant number that are with us. We have Arizona State University, we have Digital Promise, both key players in our location-based programs, and we're really excited to see the scalability of those partnerships out to this open access platform. We also have partners like Discovery Education. With Discovery Education, we created an open access augmented reality program called TimePod Adventures, where you can experience Mars. You do not need to have a Discovery Education subscription to access that experience or the lessons associated with it. And then we have all of our content developers. Project Lead the Way has been a longtime partner of ours. And we're actually excited, we just announced a museum challenge where we are going to be working with museums and cultural institutions to create even more curriculum that aligns with the AR and VR applications that we've created. And it's really going to give us an opportunity to really explore how we can weave that digital experience with the physical experience of being at the museum. So we're really excited about the possibilities of that.
Just want to note, and we're seeing, I've been checking, and now I'm seeing a couple of questions popping up. If you want to throw any questions into the chat, go to our session on the South by app, and then if you engage, you can add some questions in there. So a couple have came in already. We'd love to see if we've got some questions for you. One of the points about democratizing access is this issue of having multiple formats in multiple different ways and multiple different access points. The 146 lessons, great. If you get a chance to use all, you go through one course after the next course after the next course. If you get to use that, that's great. If you need to pick and choose certain things, the good news is you can pull a lesson and you can use that particular lesson. So the invitation for all of you in the room is, one, who's got content that they want to be able to talk to us about in terms of saying, we really would love to see more students have access to this content. I'm an educator. This is something that I'm doing all the time. And so we want to create a community around how to crowdsource, for better or for worse, the idea of what's the best content we should be thinking about and curating. The second thing about democratizing access, again, is these multiple formats, right? It's one thing to say, I've got everything, throw it online, and go ahead and find everything, hunt and peck and see what you are able to get on your own, versus, again, the professional development that comes with it, the understanding and the lessons from other people who have used it and why, the comments that are coming through. So democratizing access means just not making it available, but making it available and implementable and contextualized to your particular situation and setting. And then the third thing I might mention in terms of democratizing access is for people that have the opportunity, again, you're a subject matter expert, you're a data scientist, you're a meteorologist, you're whatever you're doing, and you want to be able to provide your level of expertise and work, even if there isn't a formalized relationship between an organization or not, being a guest speaker in a classroom, coming in and inviting people to come in and see your lab and doing field trips and being available as a resource is one of the ways that we like to think about just creating partnership for impact as a whole. And we all know this, along that entire spectrum, from a lab all the way through the idea of Verizon Innovative Learning Labs online, there's a variety of things that you can take and use in the way that makes the most sense for you. There was a question about, how do we, have we considered using applying design thinking to student-led entrepreneurship and social impact? I think the immediate answer is absolutely. That was the underpinning of the first Verizon Innovative Lab program we did, was very specifically with the idea of partnering with a community-based either organization or a community-based business. One of the first set of ideas we had coming out of a high school we were working with for things like optimizing scheduling for an HVAC company, for example. And I remember very specifically this was an app development, at the time, app development challenge. And the idea was, how do you work with local-based organizations and communities? Sometimes they're businesses, sometimes they're social innovations. The other thing I just want to mention briefly, when we talk about under-resourced communities, I don't want us to automatically say that everything in an under-resourced community has to be a social innovation. Right? Sure, there's a lot of opportunity and room for social innovations, but there's also a lot of opportunity and room, and there's nothing wrong with saying, let's think about commercially scalable, right, technology scalable, investable startups. Like, it has to be both and. And what I don't want is I don't want to relegate under-resourced communities to, you're the ones that have to create the solutions for everything, and you can only be in the space of social innovation and impact, as opposed to, if you're hanging out in Silicon Valley, you get to make really cool new technology startups versus if you're hanging out in, Brownsville, Texas or something.
Right.
Anyway, so just a small aside in terms of there's a spectrum of people and interests and ways that you can apply technology for multiple purposes.
Absolutely, and I think that it all goes back to, although there are, let's say, 146 lessons that are available through the design thinking platform, it's not meant to be a situation where you are let's say, going through the entire curriculum, but rather finding those opportunities and finding those small ways that you can really engage your students, right? And I think that what you mentioned that I think is interesting, Jimmy, is you're right. I think that in an underrepresented community, it's not up to them to necessarily be the ones to design just the social innovation pieces. Why can't they develop the killer app that everyone wants to use? And it has to start somewhere, right? It has to start with that design thinking mindset and understanding what it is that needs to go into that creation. And I think that's also where the work that they've done with the app developers has been really helpful, because the app developers obviously were creating for the Verizon Innovative Learning Labs, but we were creating and are still creating for things like 5G access. Sure. And we're finding ways that as we bring this connectivity to schools, what does that mean in terms of the solutions that we could actually bring? And it's really exciting that we have the opportunity to put students in the middle of that design process and have them be the ones to help innovate. There's a question here, and Jimmy, I'm curious about your thoughts on this, the intersection between data science and design thinking elements.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends, right? Data science is huge. It kind of depends on what we're specifically talking about in terms of how do we break down specific pieces. The person who put in that question, maybe you can elaborate in terms of the intersection between data science and design thinking elements. I'm not sure what the question is in terms of, is it about the parameters of design thinking? It is about the process of design thinking. So if the person's still here, if you want to elaborate. Okay, I see you standing up.
I was just wondering if you're partnering with data science departments within these schools to do the initial research into the problem area.
The schools, in terms of the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools partners themselves, yes. Well, I wouldn't say that there's data science departments necessarily, even subject matter expertise resident in those schools, but in terms of understanding, what data sources to look at, how they're parameterizing any particular set of problems, whose source are they looking at when it comes to this is the scope, nature, and scale of the problem. So I think there's a lot more on the front end about how to discern between credible sources of data, understand what sources of data could be used, understand that data could be perverted if anybody wants to. So in that sense, sure. In the broader sense of how do we become more sophisticated overall in terms of understanding data science as a whole and breaking down all those individual elements, I don't think we're there yet. Our curriculum team is here too. Anything to add on that? Yeah. Okay.
A new challenge for them.
A new challenge, I was going to say, sure. And then, and actually, if I can mention our curricular team, since they are here, at 3 o'clock they are holding a workshop, and there's going to be, and it's not just the curricular team, to be fair, they're doing lots of other things in terms of the overall schools. So there's a workshop today at 3 o'clock in room 402, 400?
402 and, yeah.
Thank you. I was like, and one more, 400 to 402 at 3 o'clock, and that's a hands-on workshop of how to use the curriculum and how it could be applied in a different set of settings, right? Great.
So one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about just yet is when we talk about the design thinking curriculum and the Verizon Innovative Learning Labs, we touched upon this a little bit. How do you really bring this to your school if you don't have that space? And we have a solution for that. We actually created Verizon Innovative Learning Lab online, which once I can have my slide back up.
It's just you, Alex. Look,
Yeah,
you're on the big
it's just
screen.
me. Verizon Innovative Learning Lab Online is a program that we created. Okay, something's missing there, it's fine. Verizon Innovative Learning Lab Online is an augmented reality experience that we created in partnership with Arizona State University, where students can actually use any device with a rear-facing camera and use different emerging technologies. So for instance, the experience that I was going to show you was a student can actually take an augmented reality 3D printer, place it in their room, and be faced with a situation where they are trying to remove trash that is in the way of the migration of turtles, and they create an arm and a claw. They have to look at different materials, determine cost, strength, weight, and actually develop a solution there. The other track that we've developed is actually an augmented reality, virtual reality headset. An augmented reality, virtual reality headset, that's a lot. Where it's actually, students can explore the pieces of a virtual reality headset and use those different filters to look at Arctic fox populations. So it's an opportunity when we talk about democratizing access to emerging technology. Not everyone has a 3D printer, and not everyone has a 3D printer at home. So now we have an opportunity where students, if they come home, they can actually show their parents some of the technology that they're using in those lab spaces. We're really excited about Verizon Innovative Learning Lab Online, and we're actually building additional tracks for an upper elementary and a high school population as well.
Yeah, so we'd love to know what your interests are, and if you have questions or comments or things for us to consider, please add them in. I'll get you. They're asking us to use the Engage app as well, so give me 1 second. The other piece I want to mention, I have an ulterior motive in some of the things that we do together with Verizon. I'll confess right now in front of you, Alex. The ulterior motive is this. If you don't have a 3D printer available at your home, that's fine and understandable. Lots of people don't. If you don't have one at your school, how do you start asking for one? How do you start advocating for, there's a world of technology out there, and there's a world where higher resource schools, better resource schools are having access to incredible tools, toys, gadgets, and the digital divide will continue unless students and guardians and parents and the community start knowing what to advocate for. And not just from this kind of fictional sort of like, oh, there's a utopian world, but from a very real, we understand that students are doing these following things. We understand that in this, and we've seen it in our own communities. You can be sometimes one school over, and the next school has incredible millions of dollars worth of technology, and the other school doesn't. So then the question becomes, if you don't know what you're missing if you've never seen it or interacted with it, engage with it. And now my ulterior motive is always this question of how do we get people to see what's possible so that you start asking, why isn't that available in our community? Why don't we have an AP science course in our school for my student to be able to take? Why is it that this lab is available here, but it's not available here? So frankly, there's some degree of civil action that I'm hoping will happen from these kinds of, right, we want access to these things as well. With that, you had a question, you had your hand up?
Yeah, about how much does it cost to build one of the learning hubs inside of a school? How much are you spending on it? And what are the major pieces of technology that go into it?
So I'll speak about this. So from a cost perspective, we don't really look at the individual components, but overall, when you look at Verizon Innovative Learning, we've contributed about $950 million in market value towards STEM education, which has included labs and other pieces. The labs themselves, we work with partners like Heart of America, which is helping us with actually creating the space. And then we provide technology. There's a slew of technology in there. And then obviously grants to Arizona State University for the management of the program.
Can I make just one note about this, though? It reminds me a little bit of, the idea that, oh, sure, we'd love to have diversity programs in our institutions, but we just don't have the money for the training and the expertise and the this. And sure, we'd love to have technology, we just don't have the money to buy the right equipment and this and that. So again, it's along an entire spectrum. You can DIY and find many different kits. So one of the things we do with our curriculum is we actually provide kits to schools, and sometimes those kits are made up of literally things you just buy on Amazon. You can buy, an Osmobot, you can buy this, you can buy these pieces, you can teach about electrical circuits, and there's so much that's out there, some that we've curated already, but also some that's just out there in the DIY verse. In the DIY verse, the idea is that you can put together a couple $100s now for certain 3D printers, right? Couple $100 for even some of the filament that you might need. So what I would suggest is that even along a spectrum, take the curriculum first, put together a few DIY tech kits, see how you can use that in a classroom setting. As an educator, engage your students, and then use that as the anvil upon which to hammer to say we want additional investment, right? We'd like to see whether it's philanthropically, whether it's from the community, whether it's from your school. So don't let the idea of cost and whether or not you have this built lab be the gateway for you to start engaging in some real technology-based, product and project-based work. There's a whole spectrum you can do.
And I want to add to that, can we just show the third to last slide, though, because that does give the information for the workshop if anyone's interested. I think what's also important is that when we focus on the investment, it makes it seem like this is a solution that could just be bought. And I think that it's really important to understand that what we are doing is we're working with educators on thinking about how to actually make this a bigger process in the way that you approach pedagogy. And that is something that comes from being exposed to the lessons, being exposed to the professional development, really seeing your students engage in that design thinking mindset as well.
Yeah, when you came back from Irving, one of the things I thought was interesting you said was just even the impact on administrators and district personnel and where they've taken their careers just from having been engaged in this, right? So can you say a little bit about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So Irving's a really interesting district for us. We are in 100% of the high schools and middle schools in the district. They've been with us since, I believe, cohort 4. So probably like 2017. And what we're actually seeing is we see a significant number, obviously from students, we see a lot of impact measures there, but we also see that from the educators that are in our programs, many of them have developed leadership capabilities that now they hold positions in the district. We have that IT staff that was actually as part of the initial bills in developing a lot of those device management programs, now have leadership positions both in Irving as well as in other districts. Some have gone on to tech careers. So it's something that we don't talk about a lot is what we are actually doing for educators and also creating a career ladder that doesn't exist in some of these districts. We have a learning coach position and a lab mentor position where teachers have a fully funded position that takes them out of the classroom and makes them responsible for really managing those programs. And it's an opportunity for them to get a lot of coaching experience, and that's really, when you look at the professional development for those individuals, it's really based on instructional coaching. It's not just, here's all the technology, here's some programs to learn, because at the end of the day, it's not just knowing technology, it's really knowing how to coach other teachers. And that's been a lot of the success for the sustainability in these districts.
And that's why the community is important, right? If you're the only one, again, in your school, that's great and that's fine. If you're one in your school and there's multiple people in the district that are doing that as well, and then you're connecting to a national community.
Right.
And you're seeing, what are the things that are happening in Little Rock, you're seeing the things that are happening in other communities throughout. And so that professional development component that our team provides is to create that professionalization of the work that they do, the validation of the work that they do. That's the reason why we compensate them. We're not asking educators, oh, just yet another thing to do, whether it's in classroom or out of classroom or after school or whatever way. It's not just another thing we're asking you to stretch to do. It does hopefully become, and we were talking about this a bit yesterday, we're hoping to better understand how this might have impacted, whether it's even from a perception and attitude basis versus a real impact basis, how it impacted their own leadership trajectory and the way that they viewed themselves in terms of being a change agent for their school or for their district. So we'd love to be able to go back and retrospectively talk to some of the staff and personnel that have been involved and say,
absolutely, what
was the impact? Is there a specific thing that you could say helped you move from the position you were in then? And the IT project managers, for example, key positions for us. The fact that they become kind of district leaders, I think, are super good outcomes for us overall.
Absolutely. I think it's also just promotes the fact that this is not just an initiative. This is actually a really sustainable solution within the district that permeates a lot of different levels. Can we just show that third to last slide so that people have information on the workshop?
And then again, any
all
specific
right,
questions or things you want to address? We're saying
go.
take the curriculum, please. Yeah.
How did the initial partnership happen? Like, who reached out to who? Did you guys email them, or did Verizon say, "Hey, we want to partner with you"? Or
I think Verizon was looking for a STEM partner. This was before your time and my time, even just a little
Yes.
bit. But we had one pilot. It's like any other partnership, right? It's like we had one pilot. We had 4 different schools that were engaged. It was really small if you think about it that way. And like any other successful partnership, it grew because there were some specific inputs that went into the school and some specific outputs we were able to see that were effective.
Right.
But more importantly, it's because we started talking to each other more.
Yeah.
And saying, well, what is it you're actually trying to do? And Verizon can't say we're trying to reach 10 million students and not have a path forward to do
Right.
that. And so it became both, I think, working together. That number went so quickly from 1 million to 10 million, I think it was literally within months.
Yeah.
Because then it just became, okay, here's what's actually possible, not
Right.
just from a technology perspective, from a curriculum perspective, and
Right.
from a professional development perspective. So the other takeaway, and thank you for that segue, it's a nice idea around how do you create partnerships for impact?
Yes.
And partnerships for impact, in my mind, always becomes, it's like the best potluck party ever. If you're great at banana pudding, bring the banana pudding. Like if you're really good at, doing certain things, best potluck parties are when everybody brings their best, right? And so how do you create a multi-dimensional relationship where one of the things that ASU is really good at is developing curricula? We have a whole set of subject matter experts that we can lean on. We were able to bring in teams that wanted to work with us because they were part of a larger community where they knew they could reach out to other parts of the university. The faculty member that's working with us right now on our VR, AR, XR work, he's one of the foremost, not only leaders, but practitioners. He runs a student guild at the university. So he's got hundreds of undergraduate students that we can engage. And so here's that nice cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. Faculty member gets to exercise his expertise in creating augmented reality worlds. He uses his guild model to hire undergraduate students to work on it. Now their learning becomes real because they're actually developing something real, this career arcade that they're doing. They're now making that available to educators in the schools that we're working with. Students from those schools, that's a great virtuous cycle overall. Multiple people are being impacted there. The faculty member is reifying his own work, it becomes real. The students at ASU are able to do that work and it's real for them. Students and educators in our schools are learning that as well, and that's the kind of thing we want to look for. So a real partnership is when everybody brings their best and you acknowledge them for their best,
Right.
but you also don't pigeonhole them just for their best, right?
And for Verizon, I think when we have these strategic partnerships, it's also important that we are really thought partners with ASU as we develop these things out. And I think, like you had mentioned, what the program looks like now is probably not what it looked like when we first started. And what I'm really happy about is we could very easily say, this program works. We have Verizon Innovative Learning HQ. Let's just let this ride and let this program continue. But we're constantly going back and saying, well, what's next? Like, what is the next program that we could try? What is the next thing we can pilot? And really looking at ways, and I think that part of that is we have a lot of trust in ASU. And that comes from building up this partnership over a significant amount of time. And we know that from each other, we won't go down the wrong path. We are always going to ensure that each other is bringing the right programs to schools, not doing anything inauthentic in schools, and ensuring that we're really just bringing the best outcomes for those students.
That's why our team of in-service teachers, they're so important. The fact that they're saying, well, you're asking teachers to do what? And you want them to log in how many different times to do X? You want educators to do this, this, and this, and you're not going to give a roadmap for how you're going to map it to the curriculum. How do they meet the needs of the curriculum versus, is this the right format? What if somebody wants to do it in an after-school format? What if somebody wants to do it as an elective? Isn't there a difference between? And so our team, again, is really the key part to being able to, I think, hold us accountable as well. And say that, and please don't give educators things that are kind of meaningless, right? It's busy work or it's kind of bells and whistles and that looks and sounds fun and fine, but who's going to really do that? We had some practical things that we learned along the way, like giving technology in tablets. Some schools are like, what do you want us, where should we store it? Like, how do we get it from classroom to classroom to classroom? So there were real practical things that we learned on the ground as well. And the last thing we want to do is by saying, hey, here's our generous gifts. We're going to create 16 more problems for you through these generous gifts.
Right.
Yeah. And that happens sometimes. You're like, oh, great, now what? Now we have to deal with, what are we going to do to maintain these things?
Well, and there was a question in there, and if we could just pull the Slido back up, there was a question about partnering with local and federal government in these school environments. We don't partner with local and federal government, but we do partner with the district. And part of that is we bring the district into that planning process early on, because it's like you said, we don't want to just bring this lab and it's like, well, now what do we do with this? And really just working with them on building what are the structures that need to be put in place in order for this location to really thrive. There's also a question, how can higher education institutions partner with Verizon like ASU to become involved in test products, any specific qualifications? What I'd say with this is obviously we can have a conversation after the session, but I would also say that Verizon Innovative Learning HQ is currently our real area where we see a lot of possibility for partnership. So I invite anyone that's interested in being a potential partner to explore the resources that are available there and see if there's a place where you can augment what we currently offer. We're always open to ideas, always open to discussions, and I think that's how these partnerships really start. Having the discussion on what are your expertise areas, what are our expertise areas, and what's the collaboration perspective.
Yeah, if I just the last minute, I want to come back to this question of working with local and federal government, right? We all know that school funding is incredibly complicated. One of the key things that we hope to do is be able to be a showcase for the possible, what could be happening in the schools, how students could be engaged, how educators could be engaged, how even community and families could be engaged. So one of the components of our original program was to have showcases where families were able to come in and see, and then also holding things like sessions for the families to be involved in cafecitos so they understand what the students are actually working on and be able to be with both the student, the school environment. The tricky part is what we don't want to do is we don't want to be in a position where any municipality gets to say like, well, not our problem now anymore. It looks like it's gotten taken care of. Verizon, thank you so much. Come on in and keep augmenting what's really the responsibility of the local municipality and understanding that. So on the one hand, there's always that balance. You want to provide enough of a showcase of what's possible, but you never want to be the substitute for what needs to happen. And so continuing to drive the idea of advocacy, we want you to see what's possible. It's a decision that any local government needs to make to be able to invest in a specific way. Moving forward, we'll see if there's enough in overall infrastructure development, ecosystem development is one small example. We have one community in Peoria, Arizona, Peoria Unified School District started working with a set of overall ASU programs, entrepreneurship development programs, and it's creating a greater impact through that collective. At the same time, still holding the feet to the fire on PUSD about what they need to do to invest in that school district as a whole. So we are down to 21 seconds, and I was told don't leave the last thoughts for last, so.
Oh.
Because they'll cut us off.
No last thoughts. I really encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about Verizon Innovative Learning HQ, please check out our workshop that is happening later today. And if you're interested in talking about partnership, we can always discuss that as well. Jimmy, I really appreciate the time to talk to you and really to showcase our partnership for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
We'll
everyone.
hang out for a little, and our team is here too.